Hey, everybody, this is Chris
and Kathy
from PetAbility Podcast. We wanted to take a minute to thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate every listener and are grateful for this platform.
Please help us share our vision by subscribing to PetAbility Podcast through your favorite streaming app. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at PetAbility Podcast and share our content on social media.
You can also support the show by making a donation. Simply go to our website at petabilitypodcast.buzzsprout.com and click on the heart symbol at the top of the page. Thanks for listening.
We hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to PetAbility. I'm your host, Kathy Simons.
And I'm your host, Chris Cranston. Our podcast provides interviews and information to help your pets live their best lives.
Good morning, Chris. How are you on this crisp, sunny winter day here in New England?
Doing very well, Kathy. Very well.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Chris, I am so thrilled about our guest interview today and our topic. And I know that you and I have been talking a lot about doing a show exclusively for cats, for a long time, and more specifically cat behavior. And as some of you already know, I'm a big cat person. I grew up with 4 cats, and those cats were just instrumental in shaping me into this caregiver that I am today. And I've long admired the cat, not only for their beauty and their intelligence and their amazing survival skills, but there's a mysteriousness around them and their intuition. Chris, do you remember that cat story from a couple of years ago where the cat lived at the nursing home and sit with the people who were getting ready to pass? Do you remember that story?
Oh, yeah. That made big time news.
I know, it's amazing that this cat had this intuition to sit and comfort these people. Although I guess I probably wouldn't want that cat to visit me necessarily, but it is amazing, right? If there's some intuition there. So there's just so much to talk about and cover with cats. And I think that, we're going to have to make this a 2-part episode. So, right, we're going to focus on anatomy and the complexity of feline behavior. And in the next episode, we'll talk more about, environmental enrichment. So without further ado, let me give you a little bit of background on our guest and our friend, Tanera Kuznetsov. Tanera is a certified veterinary technician. She is a graduate of Mount Ida College, where she was also a TA and a mentor to many students. Tanera has been practicing for over 10 years in small animal practice, which is where we met. We both worked at the Windhover Veterinary Center. And Tanera specializes in feline medicine and feline behavior, as well as nutrition for animals. So she's our go-to person when it comes to weight loss plans for our patients. And I'll say, from my perspective as a technician who has been practicing for over 30 years, I've had the great privilege of working with many brilliant people, both veterinarians and technician. And so Tanera certainly falls into that category. She's a natural leader. She's great with the animals. She's patient and kind with the clients. But it's also equally as humbling when you're a technician who's been practicing for over 30 years and you realize you still have so much to learn from people, from other technicians, right? You think you might have seen it all, but you haven't. There are still people out there that can teach you new things, right? So it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the show, Tanera Kuznetsov.
Hi, Kathy. Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Tanera.
So like Kathy was saying, I've been a tech now for like 10 years, but before I was a tech, I was actually a wedding planner. So that's like total flip the script. And the entire reason that I became a vet tech was because I had a cat that got sick, and he got really sick, and he was at Tufts Emergency for 12 days. And I learned about this entire career field. I didn't know about animal nursing and that was a thing. And so it's because of that one cat that I got involved. I went to school, and my focus because of Bandit has really been about cats. I mean, since I was little, I've always had a kitten in my lap sometime.
Yes, Tanera, it's amazing how animals just have that ability to do that, to, come into our lives at just the right moment and, completely change the trajectory, whether it's a career path or, maybe bringing a special person into your life or whatever that may be. So they are quite amazing. I want to just jump in here and let's talk about feline anatomy, because Kathy knows this. I love things like trivia and fun facts, but one thing I like equally as much is anatomy. So what makes the cat anatomy so special and unique?
There isn't a part of a cat that isn't special or unique, but definitely from nose to the tip of the tail. So I like to kind of start at the head when I'm talking about a cat, because you see the whiskers, you see the ears, you see those big eyes, right? So the ears, they actually move independently. So they hear sounds that we can't with like remarkable precision. So they can hear things that are in front of them, behind them, to the side, and really can focus on exactly where they are. And then their eyes, they have binocular vision. So they can see in what we consider total darkness. So where we can't see anything, these kitties are seeing far more. And then with their nose, they're obviously, just like with dogs, their odor they can detect odors far better reach than we can. But it's not just how far they can smell, it's what they can smell. So all the little intricacies in a scent. So that's a big, big thing with cats that often gets overlooked is scent. And then you also got the whiskers, right? So those whiskers actually give them an idea of depth or width. So, can I fit in this hole? Can I sneak underneath the cabinet? And that kind of thing. Also, they can jump 5 to 7 times their height, and in jumping, their claws will actually extend out and their paws will extend out almost to like 3 times their actual size. And if you've ever seen a cat scaling a tree, or you might have even seen a video of a cat climbing a wall, it happens simply based on that whole physicality.
Wow.
And it's incredible.
It really is. Can you imagine being able to jump 5 to 7 times your own height? Can you imagine that?
Well, I'm going to see if I can find a video. Our cat Midge used to jump from the dining room table up on to the top of this cabinet. And not only was it much higher, but there was a distance, right? People had to pass, around the table to this cabinet. And we'd always have to warn visitors because sometimes they would just catch this image out of the corner of their eye of this cat flying through the air, like, probably 10 feet. And we're like, oh yeah, that's Midge. She's going to her favorite place to rest. So seen it with my own eyes.
And so they also, because of that jumping skill, they're walking on their toes at all times. So that gives them the speed and the stealth to make those kind of movements. Like you're saying, she's just jumping past people to get to where she wants to go. And that, again, is because she's on her tiptoes at all times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the tiptoe thing is amazing. Like I wouldn't suggest this, but if you ever startled your cat, they can jump from their toes like straight up in the air because they're on those toes and they're ready to spring.
Exactly. It seems like they have springs in their feet.
Right.
Even from and it's fun too, because you can even see it in the kittens when they're starting out.
Oh, God.
And then, we all know this about cats. And if you don't, I don't know where you've been, but they have those flexible, lightning quick reflexes. Nothing moves like a cat when it comes to reflexes. So the kitty, they just move so lightning fast. And that, in addition, and we'll talk about this later, it goes into all of their instincts. And then you also have these teeth that are meant to tear. They're not meant for kibble. They're not meant for wet food. They're meant to tear. And if you've ever been nipped by a cat, you know how sharp that can be. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about this, from the ears to the whiskers, to the eyes, to the teeth, to the toes, and even the tail that gives them their balance, we have a hunter, 110% a hunter. And so you have stealth, speed, accuracy, and they need to use it. They need to use it. And they need to move. They're not sedentary creatures that so many of us think they are. They're not these big couch potatoes. They're not meant for just hanging out in the window and, eating a bowl of kibble all day. That body needs to move. It needs to be enticed. It needs to constantly be motivated to use all of these parts of itself. Otherwise, you're talking about a pretty depressed animal.
Yeah, they're not getting to engage in their natural, right, or natural abilities. That's something that they would do naturally. And I'm interested for you to talk about their predatory instinct, especially about their want and need to do this hunting, catching, and killing, right? And I would say, and I could be wrong, you might have to correct me on this, I would say cats are probably closer to, I mean, their wild behaviors are not that far removed, right?
Oh, not at all. The coolest part about the cat is that we didn't domesticate the cat. They domesticated themselves.
Well, here's the coolest thing. Cats make the decisions about everything. We don't make any decisions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cats are in control.
Yeah.
And I mean, it goes back. I mean, the entire reason that cats are even somewhat domesticated is because cities formed. So when our cities formed, we brought food in storage containers and we left things out. And so that increased the vermin. So the cats went to where the food was. So even a well-fed cat, though, so even if you have a bowl of kibble all day long, they still have that instinct that they want to hunt. So you'll hear oftentimes that an indoor-outdoor cat will still hunt small mammals and birds within their neighborhood, bring them to the door as a present, but not actually eat them. Since the cat did domesticate itself, those wild behaviors are not far removed, and they tend to revert to the wild behaviors, especially when they're coping with stress. Mm. And they're more attached to places than they are people. So if you move homes, this has been documented in several cases where if you'll actually move homes and say you move within the same town and the cat gets out, they'll actually navigate back to their old house.
That's fascinating. And how do they even find it? Just their ability to even get back there. You know what I'm saying? Is incredible, right? And so, there's this incredible, I think there's an incredible need for these cats to have to stalk, right? To stalk, to prey, to explore their environment, maybe even to just like you said, maybe not necessarily so much attached to their people. Sorry, people. I know you love your cats and your cat loves you too, but just the place is also important. So all these things are factors in their environmental enrichment. We have to make sure that we're allowing them to play a game of hunt, catch, kill. We have to make sure that we acclimate them to new homes, and we have to make sure that we understand that will revert to these behaviors, and that they're not. It's not something to correct. It's a behavior that we should encourage.
Absolutely, I think that's one of the biggest issues is that oftentimes people are trying to correct it. And what's really cool, there's actually a study going on with National Geographic's actually the one trying to do it. It's kind of hard to do, but what they're trying to do is figure out what the domesticated cat predation is in the United States. Mm-hmm. And so there is about 2.4 billion birds and 12.3 billion small mammals killed every year by domesticated cats.
Whoa! That's big numbers. Holy cow.
Yeah. So that's why a lot of like the Audubon societies and things like that, they'll get involved with trying to keep cats indoors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Conversely, it can be a very beneficial thing. I mean, is this why maybe people actually seek out barn cats and such, is to control maybe the mice population, that sort of thing that might be a nuisance, on the farm, that type of positivity?
Oh, absolutely. I spent my summers in Minnesota and there were always barn kitties. Mm-hmm. And we had cows and pigs and chickens out there, and we didn't have many vermin because those cats were well fed.
Yeah. And I also wanted to state here that, maybe it goes without saying based on what you've already mentioned, but, I have both dogs and cats. And when we travel, the dogs go to their pet sitter and they have a great time. They play with the dogs there, and, they get walked and loved and run around the yard and so forth. But for the cat, we actually bring the pet sitter to our home to take care of the cat. And so with you mentioning that they're actually much more attached to place, I would imagine that bringing a cat to a kennel type environment would be quite stressful. And if people have the ability to have caretakers come into their home when they're gone, that would be more ideal. Is that true?
Absolutely. I always like to say that cats don't do play dates. And if you are planning on ever kenneling your cat, it's something that you have to introduce super early on. Like, you can't turn around and kennel a 10-year-old cat and expect them to be okay. You can't expect them to come home okay. So I firmly believe that cats need to be pet sat at home in their environment. They don't do well outside of it. And we'll definitely talk extensively on that. And then just going back a little bit more in terms of those predatory instincts, we often hear about cats always staying up at night and playing and that kind of thing. And it's because they're nocturnal carnivores. They're also prey. They're prey for other species, so they tend to do most of their hunting at night. So they're, and especially at night, they're taking particular notes of the changes in the atmosphere to avoid becoming prey, and that's why they move so quickly. The other thing that people don't know well enough about is that cats actually have many scent markers. So we always hear about cats marking with urine. And yeah, that's definitely one. And there's actually different types of urine they'll put out for marking. But they mark with stool and their claw marks. So everybody always talks about their scratching behaviors. Well, the scratching behaviors actually have a lot to do with them depositing their scents on things that they own, or things that they recognize.
I had no idea that cats have scent glands on their feet.
I thought it was really cool when I discovered that a few years ago. I was like, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, because I knew that they would rub their faces. I learned, years ago about the scent glands in their cheeks. And again, Midge was a big rubber on the legs of furniture and my legs and, that sort of thing, corners. But this whole foot thing was really amazing when I learned that here.
Yeah.
So Tanera, first of all, there's nothing better than getting picked out by a cat as a person. So like if you're at a party and somebody's cat, isn't that the best? But secondly, if you get to meet that cat and they do rub their face up against you, essentially, do you think that's sort of saying, I'm kind of claiming you as mine, or is it more of an affection, or am I just leaving my scent on you so the other cats know this is my territory, this is my space? I love it when a cat comes over and gives me a little head bunt and then gives me that little face rub, all teeth on you. But what essentially would that be when they're rubbing on you like that?
So it's the feline facial pheromone, and it's actually a very calming pheromone. So they are claiming you as safe. This is and a little bit of they own you now. So
I expect that.
Yeah. And you can actually, in a cat home, and especially a cat home with multiple cats, if you go down to the cat's level, you might see areas you haven't cleaned very well, and you'll see the oils on the walls or on the corner of furniture.
No kidding. All right.
We strongly encourage at the clinic. We use it. There's a product called Feel Away, and it's basically synthetic facial pheromone. And what that does is it tells the cat that this is a safe place. You are okay here.
I got to tell you, I've had really good experiences with Feel Away. I think it really does help. I'll spray my hands with it before I go in with a patient and treat a cat. I think it really is effective.
I try not to go in a cat room without smelling like a cat.
Meanwhile, they know all along, you're not a cat, but this is a safe space, so I'm okay. So let's get down to some really cool stuff, which is their hunting, right? Their hunting skills, because they're phenomenal hunters. And just like you said, they have the ability to hear where sound is coming from and with remarkable precision. So which way that sound is coming from in motion and smell. Let's talk a little bit about their ability to hunt.
So when it comes to their ability to hunt, there's several factors in that, but there's actually a cascade in which those factors are taken into consideration. So sound is number one. So they're going to hear where it's coming from. Number 2 is the motion. So is it going fast? Is it going slow? Is it continuous? Is it, intermittent? Then it's the scent. 4 is the texture. So, are we talking about something that's furry? Are we talking about like a bug that has like a hard shell? And then last but not least is the taste.
Huh.
So,
taste is last.
It's last. Interesting. Interesting. Because for me, taste would be first. But so are you actually saying that you think that even though it's last, you think cats have a preference for what they hunt and kill and eat? Do you think that there is some sort of individual preference for the bug or the bird or the rodent?
I ultimately think it comes down to what kind of cat we're talking about. So are we talking about a feral cat, a semi-feral cat, or are we talking about my house cat?
Your house cat who finds a bug on the floor. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it all comes down to that stimulus. So when a cat is hunting, it's all the stimuli. So that sound, is it a buzzing sound? I know in my house, if there is a buzzing fly or something, all 3 of them are on the move.
Uh-huh.
And then it's the resistance of the prey. So, again, that plays into the texture a little bit in the motion, and it stimulates the cat to want to kill it and to eat it.
Uh-huh.
So the amount of stimulus is just as important as the actual kill. So it's the hunt, it's the chase. And the least amount of stimulus to induce the cat to stalk. So, if they see like the bug kind of moving, you'll start to see them crouch down and their little butt wiggle. But then they might not go for it because the bug's just sitting there, right? But if it starts flying through the room, then that stimulated them on another level. So now that stalking has now turned into the chase. And then the kill, and then they eat it and sometimes spit it out.
And then they take a nap.
So I have a question because, I find it very challenging to provide that stimulation or even find what stimulates my particular cat. And I find it frustrating, and I'm sure some of our listeners do too, where like I get the wand, the feather toy or whatever, and I'm doing like the simmer and they're looking, and then they just walk away. And I'm flipping it up in the air. I'm trying to get them to engage, but, they often stop playing or I'll throw that toy, they chase it once and then it's done. So I find it hard, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but to continue to engage them, short of releasing, butterflies, mice, and birds inside the house, I'm just not sure what to do. So I'm interested to hear more about that as we continue to talk.
Tanera, I've got constant clients ask me questions all the time. There's a question I get all the time about their cat knocking stuff off the table, like off the countertop or whatever, and watching it fall. And they ask me why they do this, but it just occurred to me, I wonder if they do this because they're trying to get that to see if it moves. Like, is it interesting to see how it moves? Is it going to move again? Can I chase it? I don't know. What do you think about that? Or are they just like, I don't like this and knock it off? But maybe it's just a movement thing.
I agree with you, Kathy. I think a lot of it has to do with, okay, what's going to happen next?
Yeah.
So if I do this, what happens next? Is it worth it? Is it going to be fun? That whole kind of thing.
Will it try to run away? Should I chase it? Yeah. Interesting.
Yep. And this is, like you were saying, Chris, it's difficult sometimes to find out exactly what your cat wants. And sometimes the thing that they wanted last week, they don't want this week. And so the cat bag is a bag of tricks that is constantly rotating. I often will tell people it's kind of based on the season too. So like if it's fall and there's crunchy leaves outside, bring them inside, see what happens. The precursor to this whole hunting behavior that I always like to bring up too is the whole yarn and string and how our cats really shouldn't play with them. Because again, they go from that sound, the motion, the scent, the texture, and then the taste. So every single encounter of play with a cat tends to end with them trying to eat it.
And that's bad. That's bad to eat yarn and string. And, right? Doesn't it get tangled in their intestines and things like that, and can be very even fatal, right?
Absolutely. It can totally be fatal. And I've seen it happen, and it's a nightmare. And and everybody feels guilty about it. But I see people not just with the strings, but also, the hair ties, they'll throw them around for their cats. And again, it's still that long kind of stringy substance that's going to get bound up. So we got to be really careful about what we're playing with our cats, because that final step is to taste it.
And as long as we're talking about string-like things, another item that I wanted to mention is dental floss. I'm an avid flosser, for those of you who care. And, I'll deposit my used dental floss in my bathroom garbage, which doesn't have a lid on it. And I have noticed that is very intriguing to cats at times. So also be careful of that item. And I imagine it certainly has a taste that they might enjoy as well. Something novel, as minty.
Yeah. Dental floss is bad. But while we're talking about cats and eating and their eating habits, I think this is a good segue into talking or having Tanera talk about these cats and their eating habits, like what they like, what they eat, and even maybe just addressing or touching on these cats that are finicky eaters, right? Can you talk to that, Tanera?
Absolutely. So there is one theory that there's actually no finicky cat. It's just that in what we're giving them and the presentation in which we're giving it to them. But in my experience, I definitely have finicky cats at times. And so oftentimes the food actually fails to meet the cat's behavioral needs far more than the taste. It's not so much the taste, it's all in the presentation. So oftentimes I talk to clients and they're like, oh, they won't eat that food anymore. And so I start asking, well, how are you feeding it? And oftentimes I end up hearing about cold, wet food.
Ugh.
I'm often suggesting to people, it's okay to reuse a can of food over 24 hours. And if you have to put it in the fridge, that's fine. But you should heat it up a little bit and at least make it room temperature. What that's going to do is it's also going to bring back the smell to it, because again, we need that smell, right? And then the texture of the food. So oftentimes a cat, depending on what their hunting preferences are, they might not like pate, they might not like hard food. It might be the shape of the kibbles and that kind of thing. So it does come back to what are their hunting preferences? What is it that they like to essentially kill? So, and leaving a bowl of dry cat food in a dish for 24 to 48 hours, again, they're not going to want to eat that.
Boring.
Yep. Boring and gross.
So Tanera, I've had kind of the opposite problem where it seems like my cats live to eat. And, I think that there's a huge issue of like obesity out there with cats and things like that. Is that true too? I mean, I could serve it in any way, shape, or form, and they're just famished. And I'm wondering if it's because they're not really hungry, but again, to this boredom. If they don't have anything else maybe in their life, sounds like they're horribly neglected, which they are not. But, then does the meal become that exciting, because it's dinner time. Yay.
Absolutely. Cat obesity is the number one issue I see every day at the clinic. And I have one of those. I have one of those cats that I have to be on top of at all times. And if I were to just leave a bowl of kibble out all day long, I wouldn't find him anywhere else. He'd be right there in front of that bowl the entire time. And all the research suggests that it's boredom. We're not giving them enough to do.
I was just going to say it's the same solution kind of on both ends of the spectrum, whether they're finicky or seemingly starving all the time. It's because of the presentation, the boredom, the lack of stimulus and ingenuity.
Absolutely. And there's many ways around that, including not only the type of food we feed, but in what we're feeding it in. So oftentimes dog owners will use slow feeders, but cat owners don't think of using slow feeders, where I find a lot of success with slow feeders and food puzzles and those kinds of things, that I have found that my obese cat, if he uses a slow feeder, he doesn't eat as much. He'll actually walk away and leave some of his meal there to possibly come back to later, but I don't let him do that. I pick it up. And I've noticed a dramatic difference in what he eats and how much just based on that, because he's having to use his little brain and he's having to kick the food out and find different ways to get to it.
So let's talk a little bit more about scratching. We all know that cats and kittens scratch, and by gum, it hurts when they do, when they scratch you. My mom is incredibly sensitive to getting scratched and has ended up having to take antibiotics and having streaks run up her arm and things like that. But I know earlier you talked about, that these aren't bad behaviors. They're just normal, natural behaviors for a cat. So how do we embrace that as we bring them into our homes? And one, don't want them to scratch us or our children, or two, scratch our furniture, our rugs.
Yeah, exactly. But scratching is natural and it's necessary. And oftentimes we have people coming in the clinic and being like, I don't want my cat to scratch. And I'm like, well, that's impossible because they need to scratch. Even in older times, and I'm glad it's over, when people would declaw their cats, you would still see these cats, stretching up the wall or leaning forward and making that scratching motion. It's essential for communication. Like I said, there's the scent glands in their feet. It's problem solving. So if they're trying to get something to move, if they're trying to see if they can get underneath something or open up a cabinet, it's for their health, because again, we're talking about a being that walks on its toes. So they need to make sure that they have this outer layer on their nail that actually comes off when they're scratching. So it kind of peels. And if they're not scratching, that's not going to come off. And then it's going to start making their claws protrude. And then they're now walking on their claws and they're not walking on their toes anymore. And it's also security, because again, we're talking about a predator who's also a prey animal. And so they're always keeping them sharp, ready for action in case they need to get that bug in the house or, the bird outside. It's also part of their exercise. So when they're stretching and strengthening, particularly that upper body that helps them with these bounces and coming down, they are doing these motions, and I always say that every cat likes to scratch differently. So maybe horizontally, vertically, or whatever angle. Every cat's got a different angle that they like to sharpen or scratch. And they also, like I said, again, they like to mark their territories. So, is it the cabinet wall? Or I used to have a cat that used to claw the very front door to the house, marking that as our house.
I'm just laughing because I had a cat that used to wake me up every morning like that in my bedroom, like scratch the outside and underneath the door, but like at 5 a.m., right. And they must all practice a lot of this stuff with their claws and scratching and hunting and stalking through play, right? So play must be where it kind of starts. We learn how to do that little, stretch our claws, play, hunt, catch, probably not kill, but catch, in this play. So how important is play for cats, well, for kittens, but also for cats?
So first and foremost, when it comes to playing, I like to mention to anybody that's getting a new kitten or even a new cat in your house, what do you want that cat to be like 5 to 10 years from now? If you want that cat biting your hands, then keep playing with your hands with the kitty cat. Because again, going back to that behavior, like we said with the stalking, is that it always ends with the kill. So if you don't want a cat that's going to be chewing on your fingers or your child's fingers, then let's not play with our hands, because like you said, cats, they play rough. As kittens, they play really rough with those nails and with the teeth. So,
or with your feet too. If they start stalking your feet while you're walking, you got to, if you don't want that later, because you think it's cute now because they're really small, but when they're 15 or 16 pounds and an adult and they're stalking your feet, it's not cool anymore. It's not fun anymore.
No. And it is kind of funny when they're kittens, I'm not going to lie, it tickles. But
they're cute because they're cute.
But you really want to, even from a very early age, you want to direct them to appropriate toys. So again, this is to avoid these cats from later on playing with the electrical sockets or the curtain rod or the curtain strings. We want to be able to provide them with things that they want to play with. So again, the poles with the feathers or the fabric string toys or the catnips. One of my favorite toys in my house actually is just a tube sock that I fill up with catnip every couple of months. And and directing them to playing with those, because they want to do that hunt kill behavior that they're going to do as kittens. So you'll actually notice like kittens will bite really, really hard into a toy. And that is part of that whole mechanism. And so let's make sure that that isn't our own feet or our own hands or, you know, a child in the house. Let's redirect that to toys. What do we want our cat to do in 5 or 10 years? Where are you going to see your life? Because our cats are living longer and longer. So it's not uncommon for, you know, a young woman to get a cat in her 20s, and that cat's still going to be alive when she gets married and has kids and that kind of thing. So, you know, let's shape these animals into, you know, the ideal pet, what we really want, because we can't sit there and tell the 5-year-old cat who's been doing this all along and playing with our hands and our feet to suddenly not do it to the child. And so that kind of goes into where aggressive behaviors end up popping up a lot of too. And, you know, that's one of those really common complaints that we get at the clinic. And a lot of the times it's because of stressors. So again, like I was saying about the young woman that gets this cat in her 20s and now gets married, moves, has some kids. These are all new additions to this cat's life that we just expect it to adapt to. Like, okay, you're in a new house, now deal with it. Or we had a baby, now deal with it. So how they end up expressing themselves often ends up being with some sort of redirected aggression, because they don't know how to handle that stress. They haven't been taught how to handle it. And so they go back to their wild behaviors. They're not that far removed. And so they will go back to, now they're not just playing with your toes, they're now full blown chomping on your toes. And the other thing about that aggressive behavior is that sometimes it's not something in the house. And that is the most confusing part, is it might be a new neighbor moved into the neighborhood and they have a cat that they let outside. Now your cat is seeing that cat. Now, when a cat looks out the window, everything they see, they think is theirs. They may not be able to go out there, but they think that that area is theirs. And now there's this new kitty there and they can't get to it to chase it off its property. So they redirect that. So may it be that they're now fighting with another cat in the house they've never fought with. Now they don't tolerate the toddler that used to come up and pet it. And so because they need to do something with that energy.
There's this whole micro world going on with them that I think we're not even aware of, right? That maybe they glanced out the window and they saw a new cat in the neighborhood, and you and I didn't see a new cat in the neighborhood because we're busy doing whatever, working, taking care of our children. And yet, you know, just this presence of the new cat, it can be so, it can alter their life, right?
Entirely. So oftentimes my first questions when a cat comes into the clinic, when there's any of these behaviors, so maybe aggressive behaviors or even sickness behaviors, what changed? What happened? You know, and sometimes the owners don't know, and sometimes they do. And it can be very simple. You know, there's construction going on next door, and that's just enough. It's, again, something's changing in their environment that they have no control over. And so our cats that were suddenly very calm are now quite aggressive. I, early on, before I even became a vet tech, adopted a cat that had a lot of redirected aggression because she was abused as a kitten. And then I took her in, and she's now 17 years old. And only in the last couple of years have I been able to actively pet her. The thing with Tweak is that she's never really had control of any of her environment. And so she will oftentimes act out on, you know, my husband, for example, if, you know, he goes to pet her and she's like, no, because she saw one of the other cats out of the corner of her eye stepping into her area. And it's not that she, you know, actively hates him. It's that she just doesn't like what's happening and she doesn't know how to handle it.
And he's the target because that it's not him, but that's what she's taking it out on. And, you know, I think the other thing that really that sometimes owners don't think about or really gets overlooked in cats is pain, right? If our dogs are limping, you're going to, you know, they're taking these dogs to the vets right away, but cats don't often show pain. And not only do they not often show pain, they have pains in an area that we're not thinking of. Maybe they have mouth pain, right? Maybe they have arthritis. Maybe they have soft tissue injury. You know, we think a lot about that in dogs. We don't necessarily think about that in cats.
Well, that's the thing, right? So cats, I'm so glad that you said this because I went through this exact same thing last night. So we have this cat, Jack, who is suddenly or feels very suddenly like he's 14, right? And my husband was petting him last night and got down by his hips, and Jack turned and swatted him. And normally that wouldn't bother him. But I've noticed that he's not making his jumps as clearly anymore. And I think that osteoarthritis might be setting in with him. And so now he's like, why are you touching me where it hurts? Like, why are you hurting me? And, we don't know that he's exhibiting that pain because he's not slowing down. He's not necessarily showing acute signs. He's not limping by any means, but now he doesn't like to be pat on his hips anymore. So now he's going to swat.
But they're pretty good about masking stuff. And I think that it's important to remember that cats, just like dogs, experience pain from all kinds of things. Mouth pain, they get ear infections, they can have muscle strains, they can have pulls, they can tear their ligaments, they can have osteoarthritis.
Absolutely. And I think the good thing that's happening in veterinary medicine is we're starting to recognize this. We're starting to recognize that cats definitely have osteoarthritis and that there are certain areas of their body that are they're getting stiffer. And we're starting to implement other modalities like physical therapy and things like that to make them, healthier and less painful and less aggressive, because their number one thing to resort to when they're in is aggression.
And I think that there's been the movement of the fear-free veterinary practices that's made it so much better and easier for these cats to get their examinations. Like we have a special cat room in the practice that Tanera and I work at that's set up and designed for the comfort of the feline patient, right? So it's quiet. We have the feel away. We have the treats that they want. We have feathers to play with. We have hiding spaces. So I think that's making it easier for these cats to get maybe get their evaluation, see how they act normally or under normal, as best as you can, normal circumstances because you're not at home. But certainly making it a little bit more easy for those cats, to get their examinations and find out what truly is painful for them, what truly is bothering them.
Absolutely. And it's also in the way that we're handling them now too. Our go-to years ago used to be, okay, you just scruff the cat and do what you need to do.
Right.
We don't do that anymore. And so the approaches that we're taking with the different blankets and things like that are allowing us to, put the cat through their range of motion and see what might be bothering them, get a better oral exam. Because like you said, dental disease is a big thing with cats, especially they get these lesions on their teeth that cause a lot of pain.
One stressor that I wanted to mention that I thought was fascinating, you were mentioning, kind of like outside things that, first of all, I didn't realize that anything they saw that they assumed that was their territory. They claim that as their territory, anything that's within their sight and vision. But I think a lot of times stressors happen at night when we're asleep, completely oblivious. And there are so many nocturnal critters, certainly other cats, because, they're out there hunting and things, but, coyotes, raccoons, et cetera, that may be very near your house. In fact, just last night, we heard this thumping and banging and thumping and banging. I thought it was the cat we're fostering. Turns out it was a raccoon trying to get in the garbage outside.
Oh.
That we could hear upstairs in our bedroom quite well. And so I'm sure that did stress out, the cat here. So, I just wanted to point that out, that there are a lot of things that I know when I watch Jackson Galaxy on Animal Planet, that he oftentimes sets up nighttime cameras and things, and we'll see like other cats coming up to the door of the household, the windows, et cetera, and literally taunting the indoor cat,
I love him. Side note, just absolutely love him.
Me too. Me too.
We all do.
I hope he listens to this show. I love him. Well, I think he's changed a lot of people's attitudes and about how they think about their cats and their cats' emotional lives. So, and for a long time we didn't, and thankfully, he's the person who's brought that to our attention.
I guess, no pun intended, but maybe we should end this episode talking about elimination behaviors and what is normal for a cat. I am struck because the current foster cat, his name is Beckham, that we're caring for, has diabetes. And he is the first cat that I've been around with diabetes. And I had no idea how much they urinate. And then also I brought a dog into our basement a few weeks ago to treat with physical rehabilitation. And he was elsewhere in the house. We have a fairly large house. And I had a bed and rugs and things down for this dog named Maisie. And we went through the treatment, and away she goes. And I go down in the basement that night, and there is a large bowel movement right where Maisie was laying.
No.
So,
a statement right there.
That was a statement. I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, and again, Tanera talking about their ability to smell and sense things that we think we're so great at, masking. I mean, I sprayed Lysol and, the whole thing. Yeah. I mean, exactly where this dog was lying. Again, on a bed, which was then picked up and removed. But he went to that spot on the tile floor where the bed previously laid. So
it's absolutely incredible to me when it comes to cats and elimination behaviors. And if you ever work in a veterinary clinic, this is what you are seeing the most about cats. Cats with elimination problems end up often being sent to the shelter, abandoned, that kind of thing. Tweak, who I've touched on, was abused previously. Her biggest issue for years and years and years was that she would, get stressed out, and her go-to was to pee on the couch or pee on the bed or pee on even a bag, something. And like you're saying with your cat, the foster cat, pooping where the other dog was, clearly that cat felt violated in some way.
Clearly.
So cats actually have 3 ways in which they exhibit these elimination behaviors. So there's a squatting urination. So that's a typical normal clearing of urine. Then there is, defecation. And then what we call urine sprain. Now, this is where I had mentioned before, there's a different type of urine that comes out. That's the urine spraying. So that's when you're going to see a cat whose tail is raised and shaking and tends to mark the wall. It goes directly back, kind of like a spray gun. It's quite incredible. Now, both normal behaviors with cats, which I think is really important to note, because then you can note when it's abnormal. So cats will normally urinate 2 times a day, and they will defecate only once a day. Now, it can be more and inappropriate when they're trying to communicate to you. So they're trying to tell you something. So one of my questions that I ask all of our cat clients when they come in during a normal annual physical exam is not only, are they eating, drinking, but are you having any accidents outside the box? Have they ever missed the box? Because that often will give us the first clue that there's something going on. Now,
yes, this cat with diabetes that I'm caring for, early on, and we're gradually getting his blood sugars under control. But he did also urinate outside the box, in the same area. And I don't think it was behavioral. It was a lot of urine, almost like, again, he couldn't hold it. I'm learning so much about how they're shedding the sugar through their urine and so forth. And, so, yeah, that was definitely, I think, medically related.
Exactly. And we'll see a lot of that where it's not just like people will come in and they'll be like, well, my cat's just mad at me. So sometimes he pees outside the box. And then we end up doing a further workup and then discovering that the animal is, diabetic or, has crystals in its urine or something like that. And when it comes to the litter box, it has to be just right. Constantly telling people about this. So, it kind of is mind-boggling at first when you hear what a litter box is supposed to be, but once you know it, there's no looking back. So an average cat will dig for longer than 4 seconds before they go to the bathroom. If they're not digging, then they're just trying to get in there and get out, and they don't like it. So they will dig a depression, then they'll squat, and they'll deposit. So they may or may not sniff. They may or may not cover. But when the litter box is just right, they will spend time in there. And And a litter box should be, 1.5 times the size of the cat. So it's got to be bigger than the cat. And there's a rule of thumb that one litter box, it's 2 litter boxes per cat. So you have 1 cat, you should have 2 litter boxes. You have 3 cats, you should have 4 litter boxes. And those litter boxes should not be next to each other. So you can't just go lining them up next to each other in one room. They need to be spread out. So oftentimes a cat doesn't want to defecate where they urinate, or they don't want to defecate where the other cat defecates.
And they also need to be cleaned frequently, right? It's a big deal. Like, would you want to go into the ladies' room and like pick the stall where somebody didn't flush the toilet? Like they really need to be cleaned routinely.
Yeah, cleaned minimum once a day. It needs to be scooped. The box should be dumped once a week and thoroughly cleaned, and then adding in fresh litter. And the other thing is that sometimes the litter substrate, it needs to be just right as well. So some cats do well with clumping litter, some do well with the wood pellets. That ends up being another thing that you kind of have to, just like with food, you have to find what's just right for them.
I want to go back a little bit to the spraying. Do both sexes spray or only male cats?
Both spray. Both sexes spray. They both have the ability to do so. And you will actually see cats, and I see this at the clinic too, is if they're coming into the environment, they sniff around and you'll see the tail go up, and it's a sure sign that they're trying to mark the area, is their tail will wobble back and forth. Sometimes there will be some chattering that comes along with it. And then they will spray out a small but robust amount of urine. There is no smell like urine smarking.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it hits you as a veterinary technician, that is your smell for the day. That's it.
Well, when you say robust, Tanera, again, I saw a lion spray.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
that's impressive.
I mean, this shot out about 20 feet.
Wow.
It was amazing. I mean, it was like a fire hose.
Yeah.
So we've talked about all these things that make up our kitty friends. And so, I mean, even just listening to it and every time that I talk about it, you can see where all the errors are. You can see where we go wrong. So I always like to start with the feeding. We need predictable feeding times. Irregular, unpredictable feeding times are going to stress your cat out. So cats don't tell time. So they don't know that you feed them at 5 o'clock. What they actually know is what's the precursor to you feeding them. So is it that you walked in the door? Is it that you started your dinner? Is it that you took a shower? These are all markers to them. They don't read the clock. And then, like you were saying, Kathy, the litter box, it needs to be cleaned. It needs to be predictable that there's going to be a clean box there. If you're doing it irregularly, then even if it's clean, but you just cleaned it for the first time in a week, they still might go somewhere else because they don't know that the box is going to be regularly cleaned. And then they need the human interaction. So, like, for example, it's taken me 15 years to get Tweak to want to be pat, but every single night she jumps up and she's ready for her pats. She's ready for that human connection.
Aww.
And she needs it just as much as I do. I noticed I went away for the weekend and my husband said that she'd jump up, see that I wasn't there, and ran away.
Oh, man.
So when that consistent, loving session is gone, that's going to stress them out. So we see that with, owners that go away for the weekend, like myself, or, an owner that passes away, for example. And then the other thing that we see the most at the clinic is the unpredictable, unfamiliar manipulation or handling. So you want to trim your cat's nails, but you haven't done it for a year. Your cat's not going to let you trim its nails. It's not used to you touching its feet in that manner. So I go back to, what do you want your cat to be like in 5 years? So I try to teach all cat clients, with their kittens, let's look in their ears, let's look at their teeth, let's look under their tail, let's look at their paws. Let's make these things okay. Let's make these things normal so that we're not stressing them out later when we try to do them. And then I've touched on this a couple of times, but the biggest problem for kitties is the social environment. So when a new baby comes home, when you get married, when you change jobs, when you change homes. These are all very big stressors to our cats. With our dogs, it can be stressful, but we can do other things, like we can get the dog walker in, we can put them in play groups, we can, manipulate things a little bit better for them. Whereas with cats, it's very hard to kind of manipulate all of that. When I was due with my first son, I started playing right away. I started playing babies crying because I knew that was going to be the number one trigger for my cats. So I started off soft and then just continued to increase the volume so that when we brought that newborn baby home, it wasn't completely unfamiliar to them. So I think one of the other big things that we miss out on cats is the mental stimulation. We just expect to feed them, keep a clean litter box, give them some water, and then they can handle the rest. When ultimately we should be playing with our cats just as much as we play with our dogs.
This is a piece that we miss, absolutely. And I think, you're right. I think that you get your cat, you get your litter box, you get your bowl, and you're like, okay, here we are. But they have emotional lives, and that emotional life includes mental as well as physical stimulation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're starting to recognize it better. I think that's one of the big things that's happening recently that I see popping up in veterinary medicine. And I just see it happening, with people like Jackson Galaxy, that we're starting to recognize that, the days are gone of, taking off for the weekend and leaving your cats home alone. I mean, I'm guilty of it. Before I became a vet tech, I would, load up the cat dishes, load up the water, go out Friday, Saturday, come home Sunday night and expect everything to have been okay.
Yeah.
But those days are gone. We can't do that and still expect our cats to be okay.
Right. And that's our responsibility as pet owners, really. I mean, that's to provide that mental stimulation for them.
Absolutely. And I try to make sure that every cat owner, when they come in with kittens, is fully aware of that. This is what you've signed up for. This is how you care for your cat. This is how, this is what they deserve.
So, Tanera, this has been such an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for being our guest. And we want to just remind people that Tanera has more information for us. So we're actually going to provide a second show that is talking about the environmental enrichment that's so important, as we've touched on, for our cats. But this is a show completely dedicated to that happy cat and happy life that comes with environmental enrichment. Tanera, do you have any take-home messages or resources that you'd like to share with our audience before we close this show out?
Well, I think it's really important that any of our cat owners out there visit the American Association of Feline Practitioners site. They have a site completely dedicated for cat owners, and it's simply catfriendly.com. You can find out more information regarding cat behavior, what's normal and natural, what are sickness behaviors, and it also will go extensively into enrichment and different ways of dealing with your cat, like getting them to the vet and how to properly pill your cat, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's a fantastic resource. I've had cats my whole life and didn't know that existed.
We'll add that there.
We'll definitely put that in our show notes so people can go to that link and find it easily. Again, thank you, Tanera.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about my favorite thing in the world.
Thank you, Tanera. You speak of it passionately. Thank you.
Tanera, can you tell folks if they want to reach out to you, where they might be able to find you?
So I'm a full-time veterinary technician at Windhover Veterinary Center in Walpole, Massachusetts. I work alongside some fabulous technicians and Dr. Marjorie McMillan.
Great. We always, if our guests are willing to share, we like to share with our audience where these folks work. So thank you again for all your time, Tanera.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our show. Follow us on Facebook or on Instagram at PetAbility Podcast.
For more information about Kathy's books and living with blind dogs, please go to enableyourpet.com. Thank you, and please tune in next time.